For today's interview, I want to welcome to the show Bob Simpson to discuss the evolving anti-fraud landscape, emerging threats in 2025, best practices for risk and anti-money laundering compliance, and some unforgettable stories from the front lines of fighting fraud. He started a successful mortgage fraud investigation company in 1997 called iMark, and by 2008, it was the largest mortgage fraud investigation company in the U.S., investigating tens of thousands of fraudulent loans. He's a certified anti-money laundering specialist, a lawyer, and a former LO. He was a prominent and early analyst of the 2008 financial crisis, even appearing with Scott Pelley on an episode of 60 Minutes. His experience with the darker side of our business can help us avoid loss and reduce risk.
Charles Robert III being interviewed by Robert Charles III.
Yeah.
Holy smokes, man. I want to talk about your I really want to talk about the Charles Robert name, but let's stick to your background in a professional sense. You ran the biggest fraud investigation company in the country. Can you give people a little more color there and kind of how you look back on that time in your career?
Wonderful. I started a company called iMark in 97, and the clients were the mortgage insurance companies, and our business was not investigations for them at that time. It was a slightly different business model, but it turned to investigations with 2007 when the cracks started to appear and everything. They needed to know, the mortgage insurance companies needed to know, do we have fraud in these files? And if we do have fraud, then we're not going to pay the claims. So it was life or death for the mortgage insurance companies. And we developed a great reputation. I had just the best people working for me. I just loved those people. I tell people, when I was in my 30s, I'm not sure I knew how to be a good employee, but I learned how to be a good employee by being the boss and just having the best team around. For years and years, I would go to conferences and never once, ever did I hear from an unhappy client that said, oh, your people really screwed something up. I could go away. I could go to conferences, and I was always backed up by this team at iMark. And our job was to go through cash, credit, debts, employment, income, go through the whole thing. And if we had fake income, fake assets, fake occupancy, we would conduct these borrower interviews and, kind of get the story on things. And we were doing these interviews in a half a dozen or more different languages. I had people who could do them in Mandarin. And we would take the interview records and create a report that was used by the MIs to make these insurance claims. So it was the best job in the world because the instruction to us was just be right, be smart, be right. They weren't angling, go find fraud. They never once, nobody ever said that, go find fraud. They just go, tell us what happened here. We'll make the decision. So how nice is that to be able to be smart, be right, and give these reports? It was terrific.
Well, let's fast forward to modern times where I don't know if there's any such thing as a complete right answer. Everything is possible and nothing is really true, and things are constantly shifting. And I should say that with the subtext. We do have a new presidential administration in Washington, D.C. When it comes to the anti-fraud regulatory landscape, or I guess mortgage entities can be included in that, how has the new administration impacted the overall landscape there?
Well, severely and in big ways. The world of money laundering is not just a U.S. concern. It's worldwide. Everybody's concerned about bad money, drug money, human trafficking, weapons, finding its way into the legitimate financial system, right? And so there's this Paris-based organization called the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. They operate on every continent except Antarctica. They operate on every continent through a bunch of different offices. And what they do is kind of give best practices, and they give grades to people on how you're doing. And you can screw up in two ways. You can end up on their blacklist, like Myanmar, North Korea, or you could end up on their gray list, which I say is you're fat, but you're working out, or you're slow and you got a tutor. You're not doing real well, but you're trying, your heart's in the right place. You got to improve some things. And so they put you on this gray list. When you end up on that gray list from the FATF, it can affect your ability, the cost and the financial cost of doing business around the world. We have never been on the gray list. We have never ended up on the dunce cap corner of the world in terms of money laundering. But the administration's done three things that caused me great concern. In January, they said we're not going to enforce the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is the act that says you can't bribe your way into business around the world. You can't, the real world, the scrupulous world, we don't like to live in a world where you got to pay bribes to get business. And the administration said, we're not going to enforce that. Wow. That was not received well around the world. The Le Monde called it a license to bribe. It did not do our reputation much good. Then what the U.S. did was, you may have seen this thing about the beneficial ownership information report. Have you seen that BOI talk? Have you heard about that at all?
No, I haven't.
All right. So here's the deal. Beneficial ownership. Think shell companies. Think I'm hiding who I am. I don't want you to know about me, and I'm going to shift some money around and I'm going to hide it behind ABC Corp. Right? Well, this is a problem in the whole world. Beneficial owners. So the whole world has said, we want transparency in real estate. So every nation that you can think of is disclosing who owns corporations. This administration came out and said that applies to foreign companies doing business in the U.S., but we are not going to require U.S. registered companies to file beneficial ownership reports. And this just sent up red flags around the world. People are like, wait, we're trying to get the whole world on the same page about shell companies and hiding things. And the U.S. just came out and said, nope, we're going to demand it of foreign companies, but if you're a U.S., we're not going to make you disclose beneficial owners. Make all the arguments you want to about, well, it's intrusive and it's, I filed one on my LLC and it took me 6 minutes. I mean, it's not a big deal to say who owns your company. But these steps are noticed around the world. I guess that's my point to you, Robbie, is that we don't do this in a vacuum. It's not red state, blue state. It's not Republican, Democrat. It has nothing to do with that. We're being watched by the world as to whether we continue to lead in anti-crime efforts or whether we end up with a dunce cap in the corner. This is not a MSNBC Fox News deal. That's not what this is. This is, we're being watched. And so far, we're setting off alarms around the world with our anti-crime positions here.
Well, let's extrapolate it forward a little bit then. Based on these anti-crime positions or lack thereof, where do threats now emerge from? Where are you seeing threats in 2025?
There's been some actions. Let me state some positive things. Geographic targeting orders. Let me talk about these. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there was a ton of Russian money coming into both New York and to London. London became known as Londongrad in the money laundering community. I mean, it was just a ton of dirty Russian money buying up a bunch of mansions in, Belgravia kind of thing. It was just so London dirty money. Well, so many of those high-rise apartments in New York, those little needle buildings that are all, Lexington Park, Madison, south of Central Park, so many of those were bought anonymously. Well, the Fed, to its credit, came out and said, look, if you're going to have a non-financed purchase of property, we got to know. So the Fed has said, we're going to expand these geographic targeting orders. And if you're going to buy a property, no loan, you're just going to cash it. We got to know who's buying those properties. So that is a good thing that has taken place. And I applaud that move by the Fed. I think that's the right thing to do. I think what people don't realize, because we're normal people, we're living our lives, is how much dirty money is flowing around. I think that's the thing that really people don't appreciate, how many hundreds of billions of dollars is ill-gotten and people are trying to hide it. And real estate is a prime way to do it. I mean, if you're familiar with Breaking Bad or Ozark, you got to have a lot of car washes to let Walt, launder $1 million. You don't need to buy many properties to launder 10 million, right? So that's why real estate is so attractive to money launderers. And that's how I end up in this position, is that I became the fraud expert. That was my niche. But in the last 5 years, I got my anti-money laundering certificate through ACAMS, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. But before that, when I would tell people I was a fraud expert, they would glaze over. They wouldn't know what to do with me. They'd say things like, "Oh, we don't have fraud," which is like the dumbest thing you can say. If you have money, you have somebody trying to get it.
Yeah.
So I went into instruction of anti-money laundering and mortgage fraud, because this job that, if you're employed with a bank as the BSA officer, if you're with a non-bank lender or credit union and you're the BSA officer, one of the things you've got to do is assess risk. So it's, now I can show you where your risk is coming from. I can tell you who's trying to get it and how they're flipping properties and how they're doing false seconds and how they're taking your cash. I can show that to you as part of your risk assessment. So that's how I end up happily here teaching BSA.
Well, that's cool. I'm not going to glaze over here. I'm going to put you to work a little bit. Can you talk about some of the best risk management practices right now that companies can engage in? Because obviously everyone's trying to get their money. Everyone's trying to, take
Sure.
advantage.
And let me say how I approach that when I'm advising people on risk assessment or their BSA program. I start with, what do you want to avoid? So I go to the consent orders and I say, where do people get in trouble? Whatever we're doing, let's not get in trouble, right? So let's start there. And so what are the duties of this BSA officer? They have to be adequately supported by management. There's got to be policies and procedures. They have to do a risk assessment. So when you're looking at your risk assessment, where are you doing a bunch of business? Geographically, where are you? That's important. What kind of business are you dealing with? The concerns that a small credit union has that all works in one county right there, they know their customers. Those are different concerns than maybe a lender that works through a broker network throughout every state, right? Why? Because anonymity. If you run a small credit union in your neighborhood and you know all your people, you have some susceptibility to affinity fraud. I'm not going to say there's not fraud there, but at least you're largely face to face with your customers. Those are different risks than if you're not.
And I want to take that one step further. You can have risk management practices, but I also think companies spend a heck of a lot of money on compliance. And so when it comes to anti-money laundering compliance, any tips out there that you think are worth sharing with listeners today?
Yeah. First off, do a stark dividing line between compliance and I call it sort of derisively, be nice to your borrowers. Don't screw them over. Be honest. Tell them what it's going to cost. Tell them if they're balloon payments. Be honest. That's hum to trid, all that stuff. That is the be nice to your borrower compliance. The AML compliance, the Bank Secrecy Act compliance, is don't do business with Pablo Escobar. That is an entirely separate kettle of fish than be nice to people. Okay. Yeah. So don't get checkbox training for your BSA. Hire people who really know this stuff and really can get in and tell you how you're vulnerable, because it's not the check the box stuff about TRID and HMDA and all that stuff. It's a little more sophisticated. So what do you want? You want
how would you even know how to vet a provider of these things? How do you go about knowing what's adequate or substantive?
Do they know more about fraud than you do? I mean, I jokingly say that I know almost as much about fraud as your average top producing loan officer. I mean, I was a loan officer for 10 years. I got pushed by realtors and builders to do dishonest things. How about this? I had a guy who, in the spirit of customer service, would carry around a 4x4 piece of beige carpeting in the trunk of his car. And he did a lot of builder business. So there's a thing when you're doing builder business that you get this certificate of completion, the 442, that says the flooring's down. We can now fund, right? Okay. He had borrowers in upscale building situations that didn't want to use the builder's crappy flooring. They wanted to put in their own, restored hardwood floors, and they didn't want to bother with the builder's flooring. So this loan broker would go around, put that 4x4 piece of carpet in the corner of every room in the house, snap a pic, take it to the next room, snap a pic, take it to the next room, and then provide the 442 saying, yeah, the flooring's down. Then his clients could get in with their, restored hardwood. That is minuscule fraud, but that kind of thing happens all the time. I call it fraud for customer service. I mean, it's not fraud for housing. It's not fraud for profit. It's just trying to take the rough edges off of loan origination, right?
Yeah.
So you've got those little glitches in the origination system, but then you can also end up with I had a borrower when I was an originator. He ran an art gallery and he didn't want to tell me where his down payment was coming from. He was a rich guy. His dad was a famous artist. He had money. I know he had money. But when I asked him to prove his down payment, he just said, no, I've got it and you don't need to see it. And I went to the realtor and I said, I've got a problem with this guy. Can we just have a meeting and you can tell him, there's a need to document. So we met with a guy. No, you're not. No, none of your business. And I lost the loan. He pulled the loan from me and he took it to another broker. And I am fully confident this other broker cooked up some bank statements. I'm sure that's how this thing got funded. But I ended up with a bad reputation to this real estate agent because Bob, didn't know how to originate. If I knew how to originate, I could have gotten this closed. And so then this realtor's burning me in this Remax office after that, like, I don't know what I'm doing because I wouldn't cheat on bank statements. That seems small, but as well as I, if you fund that thing with cooked up documents, you end up with a loan that is not, quote, of investment quality.
Well, I was hoping
that's a big problem.
The moral, like the realtor got implicated in a fraud ring later. And so the moral of the story isn't, don't cook because the moral of the story from what I heard is cook the books and you can go originate more loans. No?
Yeah. And think about this too. I mean, okay, so when I'm advising lender clients about assessing their risk, I just described a situation, this realtor, let's call him Tom. Tom tried to get me to do something dishonest. Does your obligation to perform customer due diligence extend to Tom if he sends you another loan 6 months from now?
Mm.
Do you have to go, I think this guy's a dirtball. I think I need to check all of Tom's loans because he tried to get us to do something dishonest last year. I don't think legally you have a responsibility to check Tom out because he's just a referral source. Maybe a lawyer will disagree with that. Maybe you do. But I think common sense says, I'm not crazy about Tom and his ethics. I think we need to look at his down payments. That kind of risk assessment does not come from check the box AI training. Yeah. That comes from somebody who's been an originator for a period of time. And as I say, knows as much as your top producing loan officers about the temptations that are out there. Yeah. That kind of thing.
And temptation is a good word because, I think they've done criminal studies that it's not the punishment for what could happen if you get caught. It's the likelihood that you think you'll get caught that determines whether somebody is going to do this or not. You mentioned a couple minuscule examples there. I'm sure you got stories from your time doing this. Any larger examples that or kind of stories you have that you think are entertaining? Good way to close this interview out here today.
Well, I think that I've had experience with the biggest fraud was 600 or 700 loans in Atlanta. A guy by the name of Phil Hill who flipped a bunch of properties. He got his kids involved. He got his whole family involved in this flipping scheme. And oddly, he was preying on was UPS drivers. He enlisted UPS drivers to like get his buddy and be a straw buyer and get their buddy and be a straw buyer. and he just kept flipping all of these properties. He got caught and got, I think, too strong a sentence. Actually, I'm all for landing on these people, but he got like 30 years. That's for white collar crime. I think that's a little much. But then you've got the smaller things, like I called a guy whose income was faked. So this is a one loaner. This is not Phil Hill. This is just one loan that went bad, and we knew that the bank statements, the employment and income was false. So I call this borrower and I say, "Hey, I'm calling about this loan. I'm calling on behalf of the MI company." And he just stops me and he goes, "How many dues do I have to pay on this one loan?" And I go, "I can tell there's a story here. What's going on?" He goes, "I lied about my income. The loan broker told me I'd have an easier time getting my loan through if my income showed as salary, not commish." So we cooked up these books. He goes, "I lost my license to trade stocks." He goes, "It's ruined my whole life. I lost my job. I lost my license." He goes, "How many dues do I have to pay on this one lie?" And I got to tell you, I hung up the phone. I respected the guy. He lied. He got caught. He fessed up. I mean, people make bonehead mistakes. This mistake creates a loan not of investment quality. And so then you got losses with it, and you got people who are in trouble. And then guys like him who lose Series 8 license. And you're like, I'm very sorry. I ended up having a lovely conversation with the guy. I felt sorry for him. But you see everything from those one-offs to big schemes. And if you are the BSA officer inside of bank, non-bank credit union, you've got to train your people in what to look out for these things. And so that's really where it becomes more sophisticated than turning it over to an AI checkbox. You really have to train people. And there is some of this stuff you're just not going to get until you've been originating, approving, or processing loans for maybe 5, 6, 7 years.
Very well put. I'm wondering, as a quick close here, do you think we'll get to a point where AI can do this?
I think you're a fool if you try and limit what AI can do.
Sure.
Sometimes I put in prompts in chat and I'm just astounded at what comes back. Mm-hmm. And it's getting better and better. So it's not there yet. It's not there yet. I'll ask for help writing things and I'll get things back, and it's a little shallow. It's that Chat GPT shallow that we're talking about. But as I'm prone to say, if you want to learn to fight, take a lesson from the guy with the scar. I mean, if you've won a bar fight, you've lost one. There's a thing here where experience matters. And I got to say, I've earned every gray hair.
Well, at least you still have hair. That's probably good. Probably from being honest and being on the good guy's side, not the bad guy's side. Bob, I really appreciate you making the time. Thank you very much.
Robbie, thank you very much.